World Regions Geography 110, South Asia, Part 2. So what we're going to talk about right now is the issue that faces a lot of the region in South Asia, and that is water pollution in general and the lack of clean drinking water, safe drinking water. And we're going to use the area of Bangladesh, which has a unique problem and that has a lot of arsenic pollution. And you can see the parts per the level of pollution here throughout this region. One of the things that's unique about this arsenic pollution in Bangladesh is that it's naturally occurring arsenic. So it's arsenic that's in the soil that is naturally occurring, that is being has contaminated the water table. This is not anthropogenic in origin. In other words, it's not a chemical company. It's not because of farming. None of these issues. It's not because of mining. There's no man-caused reason. This is just naturally occurring in the soil. And the way this has come about is that UNESCO project in the early 1970s, which was intended to bring clean drinking water to millions of people, drilled extra deep wells. So these wells went way down, and they were concrete lined, and the water became contaminated with arsenic, and nobody ever tested the water until the problems started showing up. So about 77 million people in Bangladesh have been exposed to toxic amounts of arsenic. Now, arsenic is a heavy metal, which means once it gets into your system, it's extremely difficult to get it out of your system. So once people have drank this water, it's hard for them to get it out of their system, and so it sits in there and collects in the organs and damages the organs, and that's how heavy metals are so dangerous. Another issue is forests. Now, forest distribution, this region here is all forested. This up here tends to be more plains, grassy, less forest. This region, of course, heavy forest all through here, heavy forest all the way over into Myanmar. And even though this region's been farmed for thousands of years, deforestation has been held to a minimum. That is, until the arrival of Europeans. So in the 16th, 17th century, the French, Dutch, Portuguese were there. The British came in the 17th and 18th century. By the 18th century, the British had control over the region, and the British were an extractive colonizer, which means they were looking for ways to pull wealth out of the region. And one of the things they saw was, number one, this had a lot of good hardwoods, so they began cutting those hardwoods and shipping them to Europe. And the other thing was they cleared a lot of land so that they could build plantations and start growing crops for export. So raw materials, cotton, and other types of crops for export. And then subsequent governments after independence in 1947 kind of continued that policy. They were looking to extract wealth, and so they encouraged foresting, and there was a lot of illegal logging going on. And so this has caused extensive deforestation. Now, in the recent efforts to replant forests and protect habitats for native species, government's done a great job, and they're starting to actually have to reverse this process of forest loss. And this is very important. It's important for the climate. It's important for native and indigenous species that exist here, and it's important for the people. one of the issues that has come about is the Bengal tiger habitat. One of the things the government's done is set up all these habitats. The tigers used to range all over this area, but this entire area is very heavily populated. When you think of India, you think of the Bengal tiger and probably the Asian elephant, which is a little bit smaller than the African elephant. The Bengal tigers and Asian elephants are two critically endangered species in South Asia, but they're important to the ecosystems that exist. The Bengal tiger is a top predator, and the Asian elephant is a megafauna, in other words, one of the large animals. And so both of those are extremely important to maintaining ecological balance in the environment. So the people are learning how to live with the Bengal tiger, even though you have some stories from time to time. I think I was reading recently a story about a tiger that was attacking a village somewhere, I think up in this region, and it had killed like 60 people. Had gone in at night and was eating people, multiple ones a night. And the governments are taking steps to conserve the tigers, to set aside territory for them, to conserve this species, which is symbolic of South Asia. In other words, it's an emblem of South Asia. Next, we're going to go on to the history. And the history of India and the South Asia is extremely interesting. One reason is because it is one of the cradles of civilization. It's one of the places on the planet that agriculture, the agricultural revolution took place, and that was critical to the rise of civilizations. So the Indus River civilization flourished from about 5,300 years ago. The Harappan civilization began to irrigate large areas in the Indus River Valley. That's that north plains area. If you remember that map we looked at of the different regions, it's north of the Deccan Plain. That large river valley, they irrigated large areas in there between 3000 and 2000 BCE. So that area was one of the cradles of civilization in the world, along with the Savant region, the area in Levant region. I mean, excuse me, not Savant, Levant region, which is that area from around Syria. You know, that we think of the Fertile Crescent, China. And then South America, where the Incas, you know, that region, and up in the Mexican, where Mexico City is, the Aztec area. These were the cradles of civilization because that's where agriculture developed. Now, the Harappan disappeared likely due to a shift in climate, which changed the rain patterns and probably forced crops. We don't really know what happened, but that's what they believe. And they were replaced by the Aryans in approximately 1500 BCE. I mean, other civilizations that were important in the area is the Mauryan Empire in about 320 to 125 BC. This is the empire that interacted, if you've read any history about Alexander the Great, his invasion of India, this is who he came into conflict with. And the Gupta Empire, which was about 320 to 480 CE. So that would have been about the time of the end of the Roman Empire. And the Guptas were actually, both of these two empires traded extensively with the Roman and Greek empires, the Middle East, and with China. So that's going to bring us to the Mughal Empire. Now, the Mughals came into the region about 1500. And they're a Turk tribe. In other words, they came out of Central Asia. They crossed through this region, the Khyber Pass. They came into Afghanistan and conquered Kabul in about 1500. and began establishing themselves in South Asia. And then they crossed over through this region through here and swept down and took this area. Now this is the Indus River Valley right here, this area with Delhi. And by 1600, you see in 1530 they came in, took this. By 1600 they had most of this region under their control. And then by 1707, kind of towards the apex of the Mughals, they had all this region. And there was only this little area right down in here, which was not under Mughal control. And about this time, 1700, is when you began to see there had been some Portuguese settlements along this region over here. Down in here, Goa, that's a Portuguese area. The British began coming in, and other Europeans, and it was also during this time that they built the Taj Mahal. You know, you've probably heard of it. It's supposedly one of the most beautiful buildings anywhere on earth. And it was the British coming in signaled kind of the maximum influence of the Mughals, and then it began a rapid decline, and the British began taking control. So the British Raj is what it was referred to. The British East India Company arrived in 1690 and began to establish itself in South Asia. Now, what the British government would do, they would charter these companies, and this company would have a royal seal of approval to trade with a given region. And so it conducted the trade between the British Empire and this particular region. And so the British East India Company was in charge of trading with this region here. And it began to establish itself. So by 1773, the British had converted the East India Company to an administrative quasi-governmental agency and had begun to take control of South Asia from the Mughal Empire. So what they did was they changed this from a simply trading company to an arm of British colonial policy, and became extremely extractive in nature. In other words, their goal was to not only take political control, but also to take economic control and to extract as much wealth out of the region as they possibly could. So British rule over by 1773, and you see here by 1890, Britain ruled most of South Asia, virtually all of it. The only area that wasn't really under their control, Afghanistan, Nepal, and Bhutan, and these were just pretty much mountainous regions that were difficult, and there wasn't really much the British could extract from there, so it really wasn't worth the investment. Afghanistan, they did go in, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. That's one of the key issues. So British ruled over much of this period. They ruled it for over a century. So from about 1773, they ruled it from 1850 through roughly 1950, 1947. But the later part of the 19th century, rebellions began to flare up in various parts of South Asia. And they were usually quashed pretty brutally by the British. The British would employ a lot of local troops. They would play different groups. You had Hindus and Sikhs and Muslims, and they would play different groups against each other. If you've ever read any of Kipling's stories, he writes extensively. Most of his stories are about India and South Asia. By the 1890s, British rule of South Asia, both directly and indirectly,